In this session of the Purple Coffee Podcast, I speak to Jim Hopkinson about business ADD and how you can overcome it. Hello and welcome to session 20, the big 2-0 of the Purple Coffee Podcast, inspiring stories from creative entrepreneurs. I be your host, Turn Dog, and on this edition I speak to Jim Hopkinson, who, among other things, is the host and owner of the Hopkinson Report, a podcast this guy adores. Now, as you probably have guessed, it's all in aid of my book, The Successful Mistake, and I speak to Jim about his great faux pas and how he's turned it around so he rocks the world like only he can these days. Oh yes, this is a book that people like your good self can learn from. So who is this Jim Hopkinson and what has he got to say about his big mistake? Well, I love Jim's insight in this interview and I can't wait to share it with you because it's something I sympathise a great deal with. And I classify it as business ADD because you have one idea or you start one new job and it's fine for a few weeks or a few months and then you get bored and you want to jump to the next one. So you spend 5 or 6 years jumping from one career to a next, one job to another, trying different industries, different skills. Maybe you do it at university where you try one course 1 year, another the next, and before you know it you're 25 and you're still in your freshman year. Oh dear. And it can often follow through to your business too. You can always be changing the goalposts, what you want, the different projects you work on. It's something I suffer with all the time. I love creating new things, but once they get going, I can quickly lose interest. And this is bad news indeed. You cannot do it. And this is what Jim talks about. Like I say, I love Jim's insight, and it's all about trying to find that balance between having risks, starting new projects, being ambitious, but also keeping your eye on the big picture. This is important whether you've got a job or whether you're at university or anything like that, but it's so important as soon as you start running your own business. That vision, that mission, that entire ethos is what your brand and business is about is king. That is what you need to be looking at all of the time, and this is what Jim discusses. So when you come across new ideas, yeah, you can get excited about it. Yeah, you can think maybe I should jump straight into this right now. But you always have to think, will it help that big picture? If not, sometimes you have to shelve an idea, just scrap it completely. Because if you spend your time jumping from one thing to the next, you will never get anything done and the money runs dry. And that is not good indeed. Like I say, this is something I continue to suffer with, but I feel I'm in a far better place today than I was last year. And when I speak to people like Jim, it certainly helps my cause. So I hope this interview helps yours too. So I suppose I should stop talking and going on and actually share this amazing advice from the wonderful Jim Hopkinson. But before I can do that, I feel I need to share who Jim is and why you should be listening to him. So I created a little bit of a bio on my phone like I always do, and I'm going to share the ins and outs of Mr. Hopkinson like only a Turn Dog can. So without further ado, Jim is a dude. Not only does he live in New York and he used to work for Wired magazine and helps people negotiate their salaries so their mean boss pays them more money, but he's the actual real life person the Coen brothers based the dude on. You know, Jeff Bridges' character in The Big Lebowski. How cool is that? When it comes to podcasting and interviewing and inspiring people, Jim knows because he's a dude. When it comes to writing and speaking and creating great courses, Jim knows because he's a dude. When it comes to being a good guy who helps out entrepreneurs and bloggers across the world, Jim knows because he's a super dude. So without further ado, here's Jim. Oh, and as far as I know, the whole Big Lebowski thing, that's a lie. Sorry. Talks to. I'm delighted to be connecting today with Jim Hopkinson, someone I've been hoping to meet face to face for a while now. He has a fantastic podcast, one of my favourites, something I listen to weekly, and he's always offering absolutely superb advice to young entrepreneurs. So Jim, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, right. Well, let's get this underway. Jim, before we move on into the questions, please just offer a bit of info about yourself and what it is that you do.
Sure. I am an author, blogger, podcaster. I'm one of these people with, a dozen different things under my umbrella here. I'm based in New York City, and I've had a couple of corporate jobs, but for the past year now, as we're recording this, I've been out on my own. I have a book called Salary Tutor that helps people negotiate their salary. So the three main things I do right now is the first, things around salary negotiation, whether that's speaking or teaching classes or doing online courses. I have the blog and the podcast called the Hopkinson Report. And I also do a conference called Reboot, which helps people kind of transition from the corporate world into the freelance world.
And obviously, this is going to be absolutely perfect for people watching this because for the young and new entrepreneur, chances are they're coming fresh from a more corporate gig, and there's certainly going to be a lot of advice for sort of that transition over. It should be fantastic insight. So this little chat that we're going to do is all for the successful mistake. I'm just going to show my new flyer there, which came fresh through the door the other day, and all this is based around my new book, which is trying to unearth the mistakes that entrepreneurs make, and more importantly, how they've overcome them. So I want to focus on in the beginning, which I suppose is still quite a new transition for you, when you first went from the corporate world into the self-employment entrepreneur world. Looking back at that time, what would you have done differently? What were some of the sort of things that affected you?
I think one thing that helps, or that's happened to a lot of entrepreneurs, is becoming complacent. It's almost leading up to when I became an entrepreneur. When I look back at some of the jobs I had, because I am relatively new to the entrepreneur, out on my own. I've always had an entrepreneurial mindset, I think. But it's difficult. I worked at a startup, and that was really great. And when I first started, it was all brand new, and we actually had the first MPEG encoding board on the East Coast. So that was really exciting. And every day, and within the first couple of years, everything is new. You're learning so much. But then I started getting a little complacent, and you started rolling through the motions, and I started seeing people leave for different jobs. I remember the first time was my friend Ross. He's like, I was based in Boston. I'm moving to Los Angeles and I'm working for DreamWorks. And I was like, oh my God, that's a dream job. That sounds really great. And then the next week, someone was like, I'm moving to Austin, Texas, and I'm going to work in design. And then the next week, or a month later, someone's like, I'm going to work for the MTV of Poland. And I started to think, well, when am I going to do this? And I realized I had kind of been in a rut and I wanted to do something new. And I actually went on a run. It was New Year's Day, 1998. And I said, by the end of August, when my lease was up, I'm going to do three things. I'm going to move to a different part of the country. I'm going to find something I really love. And I'm going to get into this new internet thing. This was 1998. Things were a little bit new for the internet. Sure enough, put my mind to it. And I got a dream job at ESPN. And so I moved out to Seattle, Washington, and it was great. And I kind of did the same thing. The first year was just new city, new friends, new job was awesome. Second year, you've kind of got your legs under you. It was great. Third year was amazing. And then I moved to New York. And then the first year in New York was great. And the second year was awesome. But then I kind of hit that rut again, where even though it was a dream job talking about sports every day, other people around me were getting promoted. They were doing different things. They were moving on to bigger ventures. And I was kind of doing the same thing. I had that complacency. Even though it was a dream job, I had that complacency and didn't keep up with it. And then I could almost, unfortunately, say the same thing for Wired. I got a dream job working for Wired. I love technology. First couple years is amazing. And then these changes happen. And this time I was ready for it. And that's when I published my book during my time at Wired. So I had that side gig. I started the podcast and the blog. So I had that side gig. So I was definitely more prepared when I left Wired last fall that can't be complacent with these jobs. You have to go out and make it happen yourself.
I think this is a common thing. I know that I've gone through that as well. I get bored very quickly. Usually, you've lasted a couple of years. I usually go for months at a time. It's terrible. My attention span is weak. But I think this is something a lot of entrepreneurs go through because they love starting something new. They love the idea and the freshness of it. But obviously, you can't allow yourself to get as complacent when it's your baby. So how have you sort of taken that now? You're self-employed, you're your own man. You've been doing it for, is it round about a year now?
Correct.
Yeah. So are you worried about going down the same route that you might get complacent or
Um, if anything, what's funny is I feel I have the opposite problem now. Now that I can work on anything I want, I'm working from home, I'm working with multiple clients. Now the problem for me is almost being focused. So the positive is that you can do all these things. I'm like, I'm going to be a speaker and I'm working on that. And then I want to teach a class and I'm doing that. And literally I will have an idea. And I met an old student for lunch and he was like, I'm trying to think of what to do next. And we just got on the topic of improv comedy. I'm like, I've always wanted to do an improv class, but I could never find the exact one I wanted. And he's like, I've kind of taught them. By the end of the day, we had sketched out an improv class, put it up on Skillshare, which is kind of an online class. It's a website that has people meet to teach various classes. And we just taught a class. We just thought of it one day, and within a couple of weeks, we were making it happen. But as an entrepreneur, you kind of have to lean back and focus because you can be pulled in all these different directions. So I'm almost having the opposite problem now.
I suppose it's key to get that balance between you always want to be open to these new ideas, take you down exciting new avenues, but you don't have someone paying you a monthly wage. It's your livelihood on the line. You need to stay focused. You need to make sure whatever you do, it's the right thing for you and your business and everything that's around you. And in a lot of cases, sometimes dozens or hundreds of employees' livelihood as well.
Correct. Yep.
So where did that sort of transition came? You went from someone who got complacent very easily, whereas now you're very focused. Where did that change come from? Was it just a natural growth, or was there something that happened along the way?
It was, and I've always been fairly aware of kind of bigger market trends. I was one of the first people to, when Twitter had been around, but I was the one that kind of helped bring it to Wired's attention. I'm not taking all the credit by any means, but saying, this is going to be big. I think, we really need to have a strategy around this. So I was fortunate enough to help play a part in building Wired's Twitter presence. And I've just seen this new economy. A lot of people are calling it the gig economy, where the old days of lifelong employment. I actually had a boss when I was in college that worked at the Bank of Boston. I don't even think the official Bank of Boston is here anymore. He had the same job his entire life. He retired not because he was 65 years old, but because he had more than 40 or 50 years at the same company. He had started when he was like 18 years old and he was like 61, but he had been at the same company for the same job. And even myself, for only having 4 jobs in 20 years, that's not even that many. I mean, it's very, very few in the big picture. The stats that are showing, they're talking to millennials, people in their 20s, that most of them expect only to stay in their job, 2 years max, 2 to 3 years, and that they might change jobs 7 times in their 20s alone. So really emphasizing that you have to be really flexible. Sometimes the things you're learning in college, a 4-year degree, they won't even be around, or just these different skills are going to come around by the time you graduate. So being able to adapt is very key.
So is that one of the key lessons that you've picked up in your time, that you need to be able to adapt to new situations whenever they do come along?
Absolutely. I was talking to someone at a conference the other day, and they're like, I've got this incubator and this startup idea that I'm working on, and I'm wondering, what you think for a 5-year plan. And I was like, 5-year plan? I was like, how about a 5-month plan to start, And it's not to say that, looking into the future and having a long-term plan is a bad thing, but so many startups fail. So many, pivot is the buzzword of the year probably, where you start something, there's that lean startup mode, the minimum viable product mode, all these buzzwords that just talk about get something out there, see if it works. If it doesn't work, pivot, move to something new. So I think people have to have a much shorter horizon, especially when they're starting a business.
Do you still think it's important for an entrepreneur to maybe have that long-term vision, to something to sort of strive for, but to I guess allow it to just be in the distance a little bit and not to kind of focus on it too much?
Right. It's going to be, maybe it works out to say, a 6 month, a 1 year, and a 5 year plan. And there's definitely, big picture trends that you need to look at. So anything around video, I think, obviously, if you look at the numbers, the hours of video that are uploaded to YouTube in a single month are just incredible. So video is getting much easier to do. It's coming down in cost. They're using it for storytelling. I think companies are going to be using video a lot. So that's one of the things. The other obvious one is mobile. Just the amount. There's still so much growth available for the smartphone market, for the mobile advertising market. So I think that's going to be obviously a huge area for growth. So thinking big picture of, if you have a company, where are you going to be in mobile in the next year or two? That's something you have to figure out if you don't have a plan yet. But when you get down to, what are we launching this quarter, that's also very important as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what's it like as someone, because a lot of people watching this, I kind of see entrepreneurs in two light at the minute. They tend to be either the young entrepreneur who are, fresh from college or school, and they've got that great idea and they're just buzzing with energy. But then you've got what I consider the new entrepreneur, and they could be anyone from 25 up to 65, and they've had that working life. They've had that corporate gig. What's the transfer over like? What's it like to go from someone who's paying you a regular wage, they're, a prestigious company like Wired or ESPN, and now all of a sudden you're your own boss, you've got that freedom. Where are the issues there?
It's interesting because I've kind of lived it on both sides. So I was the third employee of a startup back in, pre-internet. So this was like 93 or 94, I believe it was. And so for me at the time to be in my early 20s and take this job, I remember it was a big decision where we were just coming out of a recession in the US at that time. And I thought it was risky to go to a startup. And I remember my boss pulling me aside saying, listen, now is the time to do it. You're young, you can make mistakes, go to this startup. And when I did, it was amazing because I got so much responsibility and learned everything. I learned the tech side, I learned the production side, even little things like going on business trips or working with customers and having customer service experience. All of those things really built an amazing foundation. And I'm really glad that I did that as a youngster, I'll say. And then, getting that corporate job is important as well. So that gave me that basis of really the corporate structure. One thing that I was able to do is work on both West Coast and on the East Coast. And I always used to say, the West Coast is kind of all about the product, and the East Coast is kind of all about the money. So when I was working at ESPN, we were just like, oh, how can we do this feature? It's very feature focused, which was amazing. And then in New York, I got to work with ad sales and see where the money was coming in. And kind of the same thing with Wired. Even though I worked in the New York office, was a little more corporate, they were based in San Francisco. So I had a really close relationship with the product and the writers out there, and traveled there very often. And you kind of saw that same thing as well. So I think you can incorporate that when you have your own business. You have to worry about both things. You want to be creative. You want to think about the product. You're working on these things, but also, where is the money going to come in?
You need to think about the entire package, and I suppose that makes it harder to get complacent because there is more things for you to do, whether you like it or not. Obviously, there's going to be the good, the exciting things, but there's also the less tedious jobs, things that maybe don't quite excite you in the morning when you get up, but they need to be done nevertheless.
Yes. Yeah, there was a great quote. I think it was Danielle Laporte, who's kind of a blogger, speaker, and someone at a conference asked her, so I've got all these great ideas. What do I do? How do I decide? And she said, when you're just starting out, do the thing that makes you money the fastest. And so, for example, for me, it would be something like teaching a class. I can put up a Skillshare class, charge whatever, 10 students come, they pay me on PayPal that day, you've got that money coming in, whether it's teaching a class or a speaking gig, or consulting, you do something that day or that week, the money comes in immediately. And then she said, the next thing is to do what makes you the most money. And that might be more of a long-term thing, such as writing a book or creating an online class. So once you can get that cash flow coming in to support your monthly bills from things that go fast, now you can start to look big picture. And so, for example, I'm working on an online course through udemy.com. And that's something where you might work really hard, weeks or even a month, to do this really high quality video course. But once it's up there and it's completed, then people are buying it. You can kind of throw some marketing around that. You already have that in your back pocket, where at any point you could wake up in the morning and be like, oh, great, I sold 14 classes last night, and kind of have that passive income stream coming in.
A little bit, get the short-term gain to fund the long-term passion, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Okay. So what advice would you give to a young/new entrepreneur there? I think especially you can offer some advice to the people who are in the corporate gigs. They might even have a very good job. They've worked years, maybe decades to get where they are, and they just feel a little lost with it. They feel a little downbeat, and they want to set something up on their own. What advice would you offer?
I would say one of the main things is just persistence. That I know the cliche around the millennials now is that they want everything right now. They don't have any patience. They don't want to pay their dues. I'm not sure if that's the case, but I've at least seen it, talking from personal experience, of being persistent and just going out and doing things and trying it. So for example, I started a podcast. I volunteered to do one of Wired's podcasts. I was like the Wired marketing guy back in April of 2008. And every single week, I would spend, a few hours on a Sunday night coming up with an idea, recording the podcast, chopping it up in GarageBand, adding the intro, the outro, putting up on a blog post, uploading it to iTunes, and just putting it out there. And I did it every single week. And I think I missed 2 weeks per year. It was something like, 100 episodes in the first 2 years. And so and I didn't get paid a dime extra for that. And people are like, why would you do that? But when I look back, it definitely helped my writing chops. It helped extend my brand for later on. And I really think it played a big part in me getting a book deal. I don't think that I would have had the writing skills and the discipline to create a book. And I don't think I would have been as attractive to a publisher as someone else that I could say, listen, I've been persistent and I've put this thing out, worked every week for free. It made me a better writer. It made me a better marketer. It allowed me to build up my brand, to build up my Twitter following and social media, and be able to, be persistent in doing something that you like doing and have that payoff down the road.
And I suppose this is a perfect example that shows you can be very ambitious working for someone else, and you hope that by the time I'm 35 or by the time I'm 40 or whatever, I want to open my own business. And if you do volunteer and if you do give a little bit for a few years while you're working for the big boss man, it can pay dividends later down the line, because you had that, foundation for your podcast, which is now more self-sufficient.
Yeah, and the cool thing about it is it's your choice, right? You can pick whatever you want for your side project. It could be, blogging and podcasting. It could be photography. It could be cooking. Another example is Kelly Senier, who worked at Condé Nast alongside me, and she worked for one of the food sites there. She had a separate blog. She worked on that blog consistently, and she ended up getting approached by the Food Blogging for Dummies to write a book based on that. And it just starts to accelerate on top of each other. You've got the book, and then you have the blog, which gets you a little more prestige, and then they come to you with a book offer, and then that ups your credibility a bit more, and then you can go to speaking, and you can kind of just wait for that tipping point if you want. Either you can keep in your job and set up this passive income or something you just like doing on the side and just always have that to supplement your income or work on skills, or you can wait for that tipping point where your side project starts to at least either make more money than your full-time job, or at least you can make that leap and say, well, it's not making as much as my full-time job, but if I was able to quit my full-time job, or in the case where you get laid off, you're not starting from scratch, and you can kind of make that leap and say, well, what if I was doing this full-time? Could I, make back the level of money that I was making currently, or at least, even if you're not making what your full-time gig was, just that extra freedom that you have to work remotely, to set your own hours and kind of build your brand like that.
Absolutely, passion and freedom is worth a great deal. You can't always put a dollar sign next to that. And I think it goes back to what you discussed in the very beginning, because people do hop from one job to another, and that's something which I don't see changing anytime soon. If you do have that side project, it does give you the options if you do, hop one too many times in the next few years or 10 years down the line.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's less of a stigma now for job hopping, and it almost becomes a plus in this, in like the gig economy, where in the past with me, if in the 80s and 90s I would have switched jobs every 2 years, I think the attitude would be like, well, this guy can't keep a job, he's all over the place, what's wrong with him? Versus if you can present your resume, and just be like, well, I worked this job. It was a startup. It was in green technology, and I learned about this. Then I went to a corporate client, and I worked with them, and I got experience in advertising and sales. And then 2 years later, I went and I worked at this nonprofit, and I was able to learn fundraising. Those are skills that can transfer to a lot of different jobs. And someone came to me this weekend saying, if I have a lot of jumping around, how do I put that on a resume? If it's like every 2 years you have a different job, does that look bad? And I said, there's no reason you have to put it in that order. You should almost categorize it and go to like a skill set resume where you could say like business development as a heading, and then list a couple things under that. And the next one might be sales and advertising, and list a couple jobs under that, and have it more of a functional resume.
Absolutely, and it's very much how you present something more than the actual content. And obviously, being a marketer at heart, that's something that I always cling to. How you can present yourself in the very best manner.
Yeah, I'm not even sure the resume will be around much longer.
Probably not. It's called LinkedIn, surely.
Absolutely, it's LinkedIn, and I'm a strong proponent of having a portfolio.
Yeah.
Before, it used to be just designers and photographers that had a paper portfolio. Then eventually it went to digital, and I'd almost make an argument that pretty much any job, I don't care if you're an accountant or a real estate agent, that you could put together some kind of portfolio on a tablet that showcases your talents and shows all the different skills that you have, and that's something that's going to impress an employer or a client if you can kind of put something with a multimedia spin.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Jim. Absolutely fantastic words. I'm sure your advice will certainly help those out there who are in the corporate gig. They do have that sort of current mindset, and they're thinking, I do want to own my own business. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Viewer, for watching. So, Jim, any final words?
No, I would say, if you're thinking of it, we live in such a great age right now where you can test these side projects. If you look at all the things that are low cost or free, setting up a website is inexpensive, hosting is inexpensive, your analytics, your email, video editing, all of these things are relatively inexpensive. You can start at the low end and start with a free website, start with just GarageBand, or start with iMovie if you need to, and kind of work your way up, and then eventually get to when you're working with professionals and all this stuff if you need to. But I say just get out there and start it.
Get started. Well, thank you very much for joining me. I hope you have a fantastic afternoon in New York. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew.
Cheers. And there you go, my coolest of misfits. Another session of the Purple Coffee podcast at an end. And thank you oh so much to you for listening/watching. And an epic thank you to Mr. Jim Hopkinson for sharing his great mistake and his wonderful insight. As I'm sure you will agree, this is an important thing to take on board. And chances are you too suffer with business ADD. I know that I do, and it's a horrible thing. You get one idea, you stride into it, you rock it out, and then a few weeks later when you're finished and you have to sell the thing and put in that side of hard work, you come up with another idea and you think, the other thing will sort itself out. I'm going to focus on this big juicy idea now, but you cannot do this. It's all about the balance between ambition and risk, and starting new ideas, but also keeping your eye on the big picture. What does your brand, what's the difference it wants to make? What's the problem it needs to solve? What will actually bring in money so you can keep on doing this thing that you do? This is a fantastic thing that Jim knows about firsthand, and he went through it from jumping from one job to the next. It's the world we live in. How often do you stay at a job for more than 2 or 3 years? My father's generation, they would get a job and stick at it for 20, 25, 30 years. My generation, if we get to 3 years, we're quite lucky. That's just the world we live in. We are a quick, fast-moving, crazy bunch. But when it comes to running your business, you cannot have this philosophy. And I love how Jim's taken his own advice on board and continues to grow his own world in a way only he can. I'm sure you've taken a lot from it. I'm sure you've taken lots of notes. So move away from this podcast in just like 30 seconds time and get working on what you need to work on. So thank you so much for watching and listening, and a big thank you once again to Jim for being part of this podcast and a successful mistake. It means oh so much to me. Now, you may want to learn about Jim, and I certainly suggest you check out his awesome podcast, The Hopkinson Report, and you can do so by heading over to bit.ly/purplecoffee20. Oh yes, his links are on there to his site and his Twitter and his Facebook. And you can also subscribe to this wonderful podcast. If you like to watch it via video, be sure to follow the Vimeo channel. Whereas if you like to listen maybe on your phone on a walk to the train station or as you drink a lovely espresso in the afternoon, then it's the iTunes channel for you. And you can also sign up to the mailing list so you get the emails before everybody else. And finally, I encourage you to check out The Successful Mistake, and please follow this journey with me. It's a transparent and honest one, and I can't wait to have you part of it. So, without wasting any more oxygen and my tired lungs can go rest and have an espresso of my own, I bid you farewell. Until next time, keep it cool. Lots of love from me to you. Peace.